Hi and welcome to PolyOriginals with Fiona Abel-Smith. So today we're going to have some fun and make some beautiful beaded decorations. These are done with polymer clay and then obviously just added some beaded tassels. And I'll show you the technique for adding the thread so that you get these tassels coming down without any sign of where the thread has come through. You can use any form of polymer clay to make these, but you could also make them with air-dried clay and just paint it rather than use the coloured clay. And while I'm using moulds, and I'll talk you through the moulds I use, you could also use texture sheets, and I also talk you through, if you don't have moulds or texture sheets, how you could make your own piece just using a cutter instead. There's very little equipment you need for this one, basically tile to work on, some polymer clay, some beads. There's not a lot more, but I'll put a full list of all the equipment you need in the details below the video. So let's move on and I'll talk you through the moulds we used to make your own beautiful beaded decorations. First thing to do is to choose the pattern that you're going to use to create your piece. Now, I'm very lucky that I've got some moulds here. I bought these from Redesigned by Primer. This is one I bought last year, and this is one I was planning to do as a tutorial for you because it's got some amazing shapes in all of these. However, apparently this one is out of production nowadays, so I then thought, right, I better buy the ones that are in production this year. So these are two that I've found, and these are the ones I've been using a lot. I love these ones for several reasons. One, the definition they give is amazing. Two, they actually show you where to put your little ring on the design. And three, you can bake in them, so they're absolutely fine to put the polymer clay in and then bake in the oven. The other ones I love to use are Katie Sue designs. They're lovely moulds as well, and these are a couple that make perfect bauble sized or decoration sized shapes and moulds, and again you can bake in those. So the first thing to do is to choose which design you're going to use, and for us today I will use this one. And I'll put a link to exactly where these are and how you can get them in the details below. They're not cheap, but they are very good quality. The only one thing I would say about these is when you're using your tissue blade, you have to be a little bit careful because you can actually slice through the rubber of the mould. So just always work in from the edges and be careful when you're using them. And once you've decided which one you're going to use, and I'm going to use this one, the next thing is to decide whether you are going to bake with the clay in situ or whether you're going to put the clay inside the mould, then turn it out, and then do several and then bake at once. If you're baking in this as the mould, you don't generally need to use a releasing agent. However, if you're putting your clay in and then wanting to tip it out, I would use a releasing agent, and I've just got some cornstarch, which I've put in a little pouch here, corn flour if you're in the UK, and that just goes in the mould nicely if you're using a mould, and then you can turn your polymer clay out quite easily and then bake it on your sheet. I do tend to bake them in situ, even though it takes longer, doing one half at a time, simply because it gives you the perfect shape. And there is a tendency when you tip them out to just distort it slightly. It seems we're putting two pieces together and wanting them to marry equally. I will bake in situ, but they're completely up to you. And if you don't want to spend that time, then you can make several of these and just tip them out onto a tile and bake them all at once. If you don't have any moulds to use, then you can use some of the deep texture sheets, and they come out quite nicely, and I'll show you one of those as well. So this is the texture sheet I'm going to use today, and then I've just found myself a reasonable shaped and sized cutter that will work for what I'm doing, so I've just gone for a star shape here, and I'll show you how to do it with those if you haven't got those. And if you have neither mould nor a texture sheet, then you can simply get a layer of clay, cut out tiny little bits, or roll some long snakes or sausages of clay and add them on top just to give a 3D effect. Use your cable needle, press in certain areas to give dots, because what you want to do is create something that's really 3D, because we're going to create the extra paint effect to give the shadow, and then the top gilded or painted gold or silver to give that top highlight in them as well. So 3 different ways of doing it: moulds, texture sheets, or create your own, but either way the rest of the process is very, very similar. And what I've got is about half a pack of the small packs of clay. It's about 1 ounce or 28 grams, and this is the violet or purple colour, and this is Cernit Polymer Clay. But all of the brands of well-known clay will work well for this, but the softer the clay, the better for what you're doing. If you find your clay is too hard, you can add a little bit of liquid clay or the Mix Quick or the clay softening things just to soften the clay. But hopefully what you're looking for is something that when you sort of do that in your hand, you can actually it actually sort of squidges in your hand. So the first thing I'm going to do is get that conditioned. If If you're not sure about conditioning polymer clay or don't really know why or how we do it, then I do have a tutorial with a few hints and tips, and I'll put a link to that in the video below this one. So here's the polymer clay, and it's nicely conditioned, and whilst it's still firm, I can sort of squidge it in my hands. So I'm going to take about half of it, and I'm going to start in the middle of my mould, press it down, and then gradually force it out into all the points, but going very slowly and carefully as I work. Once I've got it all down and into the points, then if I've got a lump left in the middle, I will shave that off, give it a roll, and then carefully work in from the outside, taking off any excess clay. Okay, so I've got it all in the mould. See, I spent my time, I actually went over it twice. I've made sure I've got all clear all the way down where you can see the edges of the mould. There's a little gap all the way around the outside. So the next thing to do at this stage, if you want to, is we can add the little ring in and bake it in situ. To create the hook or the ring, I've got about 1.5 inches or 4 centimetres of 0.6mm wire, and I've got my round nose pliers. It's not a particularly large hook they've got on, so I can use the pliers, fold that round, and because it's quite a thin piece, you can just bend it round to create your hook at the top, and then I'm just going to add a little bit of a hook at the bottom so that it won't pull out. Make sure that's nice and flat, and then you can pop that on, and I'm just going to take a tiny little bit of excess clay and then just pop that over the end. Make sure it's nice and flat down onto the rest of your piece. And then I will actually bake, as I said, my clay inside that mould, because this is a mould that I can bake in, but do check your instructions on yours. And as always, bake according to the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay you are using, and I always recommend tenting the whole thing in aluminium foil to protect your clay should the oven spike in temperature whilst you are baking. And once this one is baked, I will do exactly the same with another one, except without the ring this time. And if, as say, you're not baking in situ, then you can do 2 at once, or however many you want to do, and then bake them as before on a tile, tenting the whole tile in aluminium foil. So I'll bring you back when we've got both bits done. For the texture sheet version, I've conditioned the same amount of clay, so 1 ounce, 28 grams, and put it through the thickest setting of my pasta machine. And on my pasta machine, 0 is thick and 9 is thin, so it's gone through on setting 0. And then, because I want to get both pieces on the one tile, I'll put the clay up to one side, and then I'll work on creating a texture on this one, cut it out, and then repeat on this. So I've got 2 of the shapes, so both sides of the shapes on the tile at the same time. So once your clay is nicely pressed down on the sheet, just with the texture sheet, press down firmly and evenly all the way around to get a good texture onto your clay. And you're looking for a nice, deep, even texture. So once I've done that, I can take my cutter, place it where I want to cut out, and then we've got our shape. And use the rest of the clay to repeat down here. Then, as before, bake according to the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay you are using, and as always, I will tent my whole piece in aluminium foil to protect the clay should the oven spike during the baking process. Once your pieces are cool, having finished baking, then we need to sandwich them together. You could of course just glue them together if you didn't want to add any beads or any extra embellishments, but I think you get a nicer look if we sandwich them together using polymer clay. We're actually going to use 2 sheets of polymer clay, so back each one of these with a sheet of polymer clay, and then we're going to put some beading thread actually inside the 2, so that when we put the 2 halves together, the beading thread's going to dangle out, and you can bake, because we're baking at such low temperatures, certainly thread like this will actually bake absolutely fine. And this is beading thread, and it's the really strong thread, so it's not going to break. But if you're in any doubt or you're using another brand, then do test it first to make sure that it bakes okay. And the other thing I'm going to use is a little bit of liquid clay, just for when we're insetting the beading thread, and I've just added a little bit onto the back of my pieces, enough to make them a little bit sticky so that they'll adhere nicely to the clay. You don't actually need it, but it just helps when manoeuvring the clay, I find. So one at a time, I'm going to put these on. I'm going to press them fairly firmly down, and then with my craft knife I'm going to cut out, and I'll just put it on a little piece of baking parchment just to make it easy to manoeuvre around. So all I'm going to do is take off the majority of the excess at the moment, not cutting too neatly, just taking most of it off, and I'll go the whole way around just doing this till I've got all the clay off, and then I'll repeat for the second piece as well. I used a medium thin setting of the polymer clay, so setting number 4 on my pasta machine. When you finished each bit, because it's on a sheet like this, you should be able to fairly easily and gently just peel that away. And as I say, repeat for the second side. When I add the thread, I'm going to add much more than I actually need, so really long strips. So that gives me plenty of room to bead with and add my embellishment. And when I put it in, I'm just going to add a little bit of liquid clay, just where the thread's going to go, so it's certainly going down to the point at the bottom and then going out to these 2 points over here. And again, it just helps embed the thread into the clay. So I'm going to take 2 lots of thread. I'm going to probably just under a metre, so probably about 36 inches for the first one, and then just over a metre, or about sort of 45 inches for the second piece. So I've folded the first piece in half, this is the smaller of the two, and I've worked out that it's easy when you bead to have 2 threads coming out of the same place. So you bead with one and then you can knot the 2 together. If you're a more proficient beader, then of course you can get away with perhaps just having the one, but it's nice to have several threads on the dangling beads just to give them a lot of security. So I'm just going to put the loop down and have those 2 threads coming out the bottom. I will sometimes give a little bit of a twist just to make sure that happens. And the second piece, again I pull in half, find the midpoint, and then just knot in the midpoint. And the knot just adds a little extra thing you can put down in the middle of our hoop, and it just really holds it all in place. And then these 2 lines come out of that, and these 2 lines come out of that. And now that I've got those lines in place, I can add the second layer of clay on. I'll just add that on, placing it so that each piece are matching, and then spend a bit of time making sure that the threads are coming out of the points that I want them to. So I'll actually press the clay in around those points at this time to make sure it's all where it should be. And then you can press this a little bit more firmly, so you really sandwich the 2 layers together, and then all we're going to do is very carefully go around the outside and take away the excess clay. When you get up to where the threads are, cut up towards the threads on either side, and then pull off the excess clay. And I'll keep doing that all the way around until I've got a nice neat finish and both sides are sandwiched together. Take as long as you need to get it neat. I'll often use a toothpick or a cocktail stick to get right down into the tricky points on something as detailed as this. And obviously the more ornate one you choose, the longer it takes to get it neat. If it's a simple circle, it's pretty easy to get neat. So last thing I will do is just check that my threads, both threads, are coming nicely out of the points where I want them, and then I will rebake, and this time I will set it just on a piece of card just to make sure that the clay doesn't go too shiny. And because I know, as I say, the threads will bake fine, let's place them on the top. As always, bake according to the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay you are using, and I will, as always, tent with aluminium foil. process for the ones with the texture sheet, exactly the same. So I've taken the finished and cooled stars and then added that thin layer of clay, cut off the excess, and for these, as well as putting the thread in at this stage, just need to put a little hook in as well. So I'll just add that in at the top of the star, and then we'll add the threads in exactly the same way, sandwich the two together, and then cut off the excess. And as with our moulded one, again set on a piece of card, baked according to the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay you're using. Once our piece is cooled, we're going to add some paint to get into all these background areas to really make it sort of more three-dimensional. And normally I do a darker colour, but this purple or violet's already come out quite dark. So what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to add a slightly lighter colour, and I'm using some iridescent paints, these studio acrylics, so a violet blue iridescent and a blue-green iridescent, and together they make up a colour like this, which has a lovely shine. So with several biodegradable wet wipes to hand, and obviously wear gloves if you'd rather, but I'm quite happy with my hands getting messy. I'm working on a piece of paper, so if it makes a mess it doesn't go on my tile, and I'm going to push this on as quickly as I can, all on one side, and almost immediately rub it off all the top areas. So what you're left with is that iridescent shine in the background, and I'm going to repeat that for the other side, and then also go all the way around the edges, so that if it gets in any of the deep set areas, they're going to have a little bit of iridescence as well. So the paint has dried, both sides. You can see there I've done this one, and this one you can really see when it catches the light how that lighter colour just gives the extra detail. This one is the same, but it's just not showing up on the camera quite so well. So the next thing to do is to use some gilder's paste if you want to, and we're just going to very gently rub it over the highlights. If you don't have any gilder's paste, you can do the same with gold or silver paint. Just put some flat on your surface, and whilst it's wet again, put a small amount on your finger and rub it over. And again, obviously wear gloves if you need to do that. So I'm going to do one in gold and one in silver, so I think I'll do gold in that one, and this one I'll do in silver. That's the same gold finger, even if you can't see it particularly clearly. And again, I have a biodegradable wet wipe to hand, and I will just simply squeeze a little bit out, put it on my finger, and then rub it across the surface. And I'll do that over the whole thing, really bringing out those details. And that really brings the whole piece to life. So I'll do the same on the other side, and I'll also put some on the sides of my finger and go down in between all these grooves around the edges, and then I'll do this one in gold and show you them both when I've got them done. There we are, they've both been done, both sides and around the edges, one in silver and one in gold. And whether you use the mould or the texture sheets, you should get a good pattern and a good definition. If you are using paint, just let that dry. Because I've been using gilder's paste, I'm going to wait sort of about half an hour to an hour, and then just gently buff over the whole thing with a soft cloth just to bring out the gilder's paste, and then also make sure you don't going to transfer anything onto your hands. Next thing to do is to get together some beads, and just choose whatever you have around. I'm going to be using glass and metal beads, a combination of things I've picked up over the years, and also a beading needle, which is what I'll thread onto these because I'm using some smaller seed beads. But if you've got larger beads, just use an ordinary needle. To create the tassel, I've got a collection of beads here, both in purples, silvers and clear, and I've got some little dagger beads to dangle on the end. They're just little clear ones, and I've put the two side double pairs of threads off to one side, and I'm working just on the bottom middle tassel to start with, because that's going to be the longest one, and once I've done that one I'll make shorter ones either side, and these two will match. And I'm simply going to create a long straight row of beads. I'll add a few extra beads at the bottom just to go around the dagger beads so it hangs nicely, and then I'm going to go all the way back up to the top by threading my needle back up through the beads. So all the way down and then back up to the top. So what you will generally find is that you've got a gap here where you've been sort of threading through. So the way to get rid of this gap, because we want these beads to be pretty close up to the top, is with this off to one side, just pull the beads gently up towards the top, and then with those still in place, just pull this with the needle still in, and it should move the thread right up to the top for you. And what we're then going to do is create a knot, and having knotted it here, then I'm going to, with this thread, go all the way back down to the bottom, and then with this thread I will put this into the needle and then go all the way down, bring it all the way back up, and then cut off the two ends. And that way you've got 2 or 3 threads going down through the tassel to give you the strength. You've got a knot here, but you've threaded the end of the line back in so it's neatly out of the way. For those of you who know how to do a proper beading knot, do that, but for those of you who don't, then simply doing a slip knot and doing it several times will actually work, and you'll find that when you do that it'll tighten the threads up slightly as well. You want it tight, but you don't want it so tight that it's going to be stiff. When it hangs, you want a little bit of an angle, but you also want to be aware that over time the threads will just sort of ease off slightly, so you will get a little bit of excess thread at the top, but that is fine and it won't really show up when you are displaying your decoration when it is finished. So I tend to do 4, and when I've done 4 I will simply, as I say, thread my way back down through the whole length of the beads. Snip off the 2 threads from this one, making sure you don't snip obviously the rest of the beading thread with the beads on. And that's your first tassel bit done, and now we're going to do the same on one side and then repeat the pattern on the other side, but this time I'll do a slightly different configuration and have it comes down to about here on either side. Once all the beadwork is finished, the last thing to think about is which way you want your decoration to hang, if it's going to be hanging on a tree or something. And for me, I need it to hang so that this is towards the front, so I'm just going to add an extra jump ring just onto our loop at the top there, so that when I hang the ribbon through, it's going to hang in the right orientation. And there are both of our pieces finished and ready as beautiful beaded decorations. Gold version on the texture sheet and the silver version with the mould. And here's just a few more examples for you. Again, these are all using those redesign with primer moulds, but they do give some fantastic effects, giving you some beautiful beaded decorations. That's the end of today's tutorial. I hope you enjoyed that one and have fun making some of your own. As always, thank you so much for watching, and a special thank you to those of you who subscribe. I really do appreciate it. I think I might be making a few more of these, ready for the festive season, but of course they'll also make good decorations all year round, and also, if you make slightly smaller ones, they'll make good jewellery pieces too. Whatever you do, have fun with your polymer clay, and hopefully I'll see you next time. That's it for now. Bye.